Hello everyone, welcome to another video on my 4NCL matches. And here I played a game against somebody who is higher rated than it says here. They're about 2050 or 2100 or somewhere between that in their official standard play rating. And in this game, which is 45 minutes with a 15-second increment throughout, I thought we were doing well as a team. We've, I think, won practically every match, and we're top of the division. We also outrated our opponents by a fair amount on every board, so I didn't feel as much pressure to win. I thought that as long as the team essentially didn't lose 4-0, we'd have a very, very good chance of being promoted. But onto the game. My opponent decided to play d4, and I played knight f6, as I do most of the time. Knight f3, cutting out chances of me doing c5 or e5 in the kind of Benoni or the Budapest gambits if they play c4. Here I played e6, which has lots of transpositional value. If white plays c4, I can play d5, c5, b6, bishop e7, bishop b4 check, and I'm sure there's moves I've missed out as well, all of which will transpose into main lines. And if white plays moves like e3 or g3 or whatever, I have certain systems I play against those moves. But they played the London system. It's very, very solid. White can get a big advantage if black goes a bit wrong, and even if black plays the most critical lines, white generally will not be worse and will have a fairly comfortable game. So it's a very good opening for players who are, I'd say, over about 1600 in the ratings. And I played c5 to attack their centre, but white quickly sets up the sort of anchor, the sort of pyramid, with the top of the pyramid being d4, which is where I was aiming at. White's now solidified. I then play d5, which is a critical choice because you can also have the pawn on d6, where it will prevent white's knight jumping into e5. On d5, though, it gains more space, but I've had better success with the pawn on d6, to be honest, so I probably should have done that because it suits my style more. Knight d2, bishop d6, and even though I have the so-called good bishop on the dark squares, and white's dark square bishop is bad because white's pawns, and not mine, are on the dark squares, my bishop will be mostly an attacking force, their one will be a defensive piece. I do want to trade those bishops off because in the London system the f4 bishop can be very annoying. Later on it can be on g5 or just be controlling lots of central squares. And by trading it, it will usually allow black to claim that white's slight space advantage is not really worth much because there's been a trade of minor pieces. White drops back so that if I take the bishop, they'll take with the h-pawn, unleashing their h1 rook. I don't want that to happen because Simon Williams, as well as several other masters, have proven that if white can get the h-rook into the game, attacking the king side, black has a really tough time holding the position. So I don't want to give white that chance. They simply set up, and I should be thinking about where to attack. And my eventual conclusion was I wanted to play the move pawn e5, which I believe is not correct. I think I should in fact be playing a6, b5, and then bishop b7, trying to gain lots of space on the queen side. But I played rook e8. This move was trying to play the move pawn e5, but quick as a flash, white occupies e5, preventing my break, and gets this amazing outpost. I can take the knight with the bishop if I choose to, but when white takes back with the pawn, they'll have gained a lot of space. And here, if I've lost the bishop pair, space is more important for white. I keep tension with queen c7. I really want white to be attempting to trade off their knight on e5, which will be a thorn in my side for most of this game. But white plays the excellent move, and I believe the best on the board, f4. So if I ever take the knight in whatever way, they will take with the f-pawn, and after they castle, their rook on the f-file will then be very, very powerful. they will have gained more space on the king side and be able to follow up with a big attack. Now I realise queenside play with b5 is needed, so I play rook b8 to get b5 working. White castles, and I shove b5, attempting to fight on the queen side. Bishop h4. Now, if I were to ignore the bishop and play b4, trying to gain all that space, white would have an absolutely massive attack. Bishop takes knight, pawn takes. And then there may be a stronger move, but queen h5 was what I was scared of. And after pawn takes, f takes, their rook, their queen, their bishop on d3, all pointing towards my king. It turns out that this is just barely holdable with bishop takes e5, which I may have found in the game. And eventually white will have to take my bishop, and I can take back with the knight, and I have survived the attack, or at least I have for now. But this is the position I really hate, because even though I'm not really down on material, it's 6 pawns each, bishop, knight, queen, 2 rooks, my king is really weak. White has a passed h-pawn, and the initiative as well. Even though I control the centre, I don't feel like this is pleasant for black. And indeed, the computer evaluation is about half a pawn to the good for white. So on a human level, this looks awful. I don't want to play this at all. Therefore, I prevent that line with bishop e7, so that if white takes on f6, I take with the bishop, and then I'm more in control of the king side. So white plays g4. They're planning to play g5, forcing my knight to move. Then queen h5, keeping this big attack. I preempt the move g5, which would force my knight away, whatever I did, with the move knight d7. If I can trade off both the bishop and the knight on e5 and h4 respectively, I think I should be able to hold the position with this trade. White does the first trade, which I'm happy to accept, but not the second one. They don't force knight takes d7, which would allow me to be more free. They play queen f3, and again their knight is essentially going to stay there on e5. If I take, the f-pawn will capture, and they'll have a big attack with their queen and rook lined up on f7. I play b4, attempting to fight on the queen side, and white switches to the h-file with the queen. h7 is attacked from the bishop and Her Majesty. It turns out the best move is knight f8, which the computer finds in the space of a second or two. I couldn't see that move, or at least I didn't appreciate how strong it was. I wanted to keep the option of trading knights on the table. I played knight g6, blocking their bishop from having control of h7, and potentially getting a trade of knights in the near future. And I was hoping white would inadvisably play the pawn break, f5, attempting to use their rook in the attack as well. But here I have the move pawn takes, and then I think it doesn't really matter which way they take, but the most critical line is pawn takes. Here I would take their knight with my d7 knight, and what's really nice, they can't take on g6 because their queen will drop from my c8 bishop. If they take my other knight, then I'll capture, and I'm attacking their bishop on d3. White's attack has run out, and I should be fine. White does not want to give me this as an option, so they take me, which is a bit inaccurate. Maybe knight f3 from d2 was a better choice. I take back with the h-pawn, taking towards the centre and keeping f5 more under guard. Rook c1 is played, lining up with my queen. I'm not sure this is the best move because white is not going to attack on the queen side. Their plan is the king side. Maybe again knight f3 may have been the stronger move. I took, because I do want to attack on the queen side. They take with their pawn, but I jump in and infiltrate with rook b2. And this move gets my rook active. I'm attacking the a-pawn and the knight. White doesn't fall for my trap with the move rook c2, which I was hoping they would do, because then, even though I'm trading off my really good rook, I can take here, I believe, and the good thing is that white can't take with their c-pawn because I'll take their bishop. They'll take with the e-pawn, and I was thinking that possibly bishop a6 attacking their rook, and I've somewhat activated my forces, and I can also play things like rook c8 lining up with their c3 pawn, or simply knight f6 in the near future, and maybe knight to e5, or knight b6 to c4, and I get good active pieces. This didn't happen though. White played the sort of correct strategy with knight f3, going for more kingside attack, and I take on a2, which turns out to be a little inaccurate because I could have improved some more of my pieces with things like knight f6 or knight f8. White played bishop b5, and what I had missed here was white's idea. I thought this was good because the reason I did rook a2 was to play bishop a6, attempting to trade off the bishops and be a pawn up with white's attack having fizzled out, and I would evaluate this as better for black. It turns out this is actually better for black, but not in the way I thought. White played a very, very nice move. I wonder if you can see it. What does white play? So the move which I had not considered as much as I should have done is bishop takes d7, giving me the exchange. And I think white is going to maintain this attack with knight g5 no matter what I play. So I may as well take the exchange off them, they recapture, and then take on d7. White jumps into with knight g5, and here I had an idea which took 20 minutes or so to find, which is I want to put my queen on c2 on the green square, so it's threatening queen g2 and queen to h2 if the white queen were to go away from controlling those squares. And for me to get to c2, if I go queen a4, I think white has too many sort of checks. I did analyze it for a while. I actually wanted to have my queen on the route to c2 to go via c8 or c7. So it's either controlling f5, preventing white from breaking, or at least attempting to, from playing f5 themselves, or queen c7. At least if white tries to break with f5, I've got h2 in my sights as well, so white will be a bit more restricted with their pieces. It turns out queen a4 is, I think, the second best move on the board, but to my surprise, I actually played the best move after about 20 minutes thinking, which was c takes d4. This way, when white takes with their c-pawn, I can get my queen to c8 or c7, and then on to c2, so the c-pawns aren't blocking my path. And if white takes with the e-pawn, which is a move trying to prevent me from getting to c2, what they've done is the e-file is more open. So I can still go either queen b5 to b2 or queen a4 to c2. But I like queen b5 a bit better here because I could go to e2 or b2, depending on how white positions their forces. And if white plays f5, because my queen has left the duty of guarding that square, I take with the e-pawn, they capture, and then rook e2 from e8. And I've got moves like rook g3 coming, rook g2, I mean, rook g2 coming very, very quickly. White's attack doesn't get through fast enough, although it's still pretty scary after the move queen h7, king f8, queen h8, king e7, and I had looked at the move f6 check, and if I take it, queen takes f6, and I'm in some trouble, so I'd analysed king d7 as being good for black, even though it's extremely scary. Can you see what's wrong with white taking on g7, attempting to get another queen? Rook g2, king h1, and then queen takes f1, checkmate. So none of this was played by white. It does turn out that My moves are somewhat computer approved. They're not always the best moves, but they're like top 2 usually. So I played this quite well. But they took with a c-pawn, and then it turns out queen c7 is more accurate than my move, because I do prevent f5 more forcefully, attacking h2. But I played queen c8 because I just wanted to keep an eye on my rook. And also I'm still, as I say, controlling the f5 square with the queen. f5 was played, so I took with the e-pawn, although apparently the g-pawn is a tiny bit better. White took with the g-pawn. I took back again. I don't want white to play f6 or f takes g6, which could trap my king in this little area of the king's side. Queen h7 was played. White does not want to trade queens, being exchanged down. And if they play the move rook takes f5, I have the maybe slightly anticlimactic plan of simply trading the queens by force with queen takes e3. Then when they take back with their queen, I will be the exchange up and able to win the game. So that's why queen h7 was played. King f8, check, takes. They're attacking f7, I mean. And if I play rook f8, that might be okay, but I was thinking queen e5 check, and I was still struggling to calculate in this position. There's also moves like knight h7 or certain other things I may have missed. But I did see that queen c2 threatens a couple of checkmates, and white's attack I thought wasn't strong enough to win. I wasn't sure if I was winning or if it was a draw, but I didn't think I was losing. Because queen, okay, they played queen e5, but queen takes f7, I believe I actually have the slightly cheeky move, king d6. And the queen takes rook doesn't work because I checkmate them. And with queen f6 check, again, I thought I could get away with king c7. And this would transpose to the game after white's next move. So I was right, I think, about this being okay. Queen e5 is played, king d7, queen takes pawn, check. And if I go king e7, I think it's a draw. So I go king c7 to escape. And this is a slight inaccuracy, but it doesn't really matter. I thought I could, if they play queen c5, I trade queens, or if they take on f5, I will trade queen. I'll checkmate them. And there's no other checks, or so I thought. But there's queen takes f7, and apparently king b6 is a really good move, with the same plan of if they take my rook, I will checkmate them. But here I didn't want to take any unnecessary risk, and played king d8, queen d5 check, and then here was my move, king c8. There's no good checks for white, and if queen a8 is played to put me in check once again, king c7, a discovered attack on their queen from my rook, and I don't see a way for white to save the queen and prevent checkmates, apart from this funny looking move, queen h1. But I don't really believe that white can be holding this position, because they've given up all their initiative and attack, and I have some fairly simple moves like rook h8 or rook g8 to pin their knight, and I can simply improve my pieces very, very simply. Or rook takes e3 would also be acceptable, I think. So this, to me, doesn't look like it could work. But in the game, after king c8, they took on f5 with check, hoping to hold the position. I then take on e3, and it's not entirely simple to win this ending, which I found to my slight shock. After rook e1 check and forcing off the rooks, I believed I could win with rook h2, but white has knight f3, defending both pawns and attacking my rook. I played a5, and I think white may have made a slight error, but maybe it's losing anyway. They played h5, which allowed the move rook h2, winning their h-pawn. I thought they were going to play king g1, preventing that plan, but I think I'm just in time with a4, h5, a3, no, sorry, not a3, sorry. Yeah, if a3, then h6, and they might just make it. But possibly I can do a3. I just thought to make things simpler, I would play rook e2. And then when white keeps pushing the pawns, I can play rook e8, and I'm in time. And this would avoid all sorts of weird tactics where they can play things like knight f7, for example. If the pawn was already on h7, it could get awkward. And if my pawn's on a3, respectively. I thought this was much simpler, because here I believe I can play either rook g8 check, king c7 to avoid knight d6, or even like rook f8 might be okay, preventing all the forks and pins and everything. So h7, and now I would have free rein to push. And the moment white promotes, I will sacrifice my rook for the new queen. They'll take back, and I promote on a1. So this was the plan, but it did not come to fruition because white played h5, rook h2, knight e4, attempting to centralize the pieces, and I now decided I could take the h-pawn anytime I liked, and push. Knight d6 check, king d7, and then a very nice move from white. Can you see what white did as a form of swindle to draw the game? So it's a clever move, knight c4. If I take on h5, knight b6 forks my king and pawn, and then they will win the pawn, and it will be rook and knight versus rook versus knight, which is essentially a draw. I had to play a little bit carefully. King c6. White ran their king over to the a file, or tried to. Then I pushed my own king up to make sure there was no swindles or drawing techniques for white, and I pushed. Here I thought it was game over, I didn't need to calculate anymore, but I was wrong. Knight takes a3, king takes, and then the best move on the board, or the move that gave white the best chance, king c3. White is planning king c4, d5, king c5, king c6, d6, and the king and pawn will both move up together, and if my king and my rook don't coordinate well enough, white may get a draw, forcing my rook to sacrifice itself for their pawn to prevent the promotion. What should I play as black to guarantee the win? Alright, the move I played in the game, king a4, king c4, king a5. The key point is if my king can reach the d file in front of the pawn, I will win. And white can't play king c5 right now, which gives me the tempo to play king b6. And white resigned because I will get my king to d6, win the pawn, and I can win rook and king versus king pretty simply. So it was a very interesting game. I was worse for the opening and several parts of the middle game, but I think I may have actually made it to a better position after I played rook b2. And it does turn out that my line with c takes d4 and then queen c8 was one of the only ways to not draw the match or lose the match, because white had lots of perpetual check tricks and various checkmate ideas with playing the f pawn up the board, involving all their pieces. So I played it well, although perhaps I shouldn't have played this opening and middle game quite in that manner to give white all that initiative. The bad news was that our team did go down in flames. Their bottom board and the opponent's board 2 both won their matches, and on board 3 it was a draw, I believe. So even though I won the game, we lost 2.5, 1.5. But we're still, I think, in the top 2 in the league. So as long as we don't lose the next match, I think we'll be able to be in the promotion pool and then have to play the qualifying games to actually get promoted in the league. Right, well, I hope you enjoyed the video, and see you next time. Bye.